Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. Got a big show lined up for you. All right, yeah, Georgia snitches and FSU gets stitches. FSU got hit by the NCAA. These poor guys, gosh, FSU can't catch a break, man. They just can't. First, they get hammered by the college football playoff after going undefeated. They get totally disrespected.
Boy, that's the story of my life. No respect. No respect.
Then Georgia runs a score up on them, and they weren't even trying to, 63-3, because Florida State, all their top players opted out. They basically boycotted the game. They showed up, but what they had was their entire second string. And Georgia, look, man, you think Georgia's going to cut some slack to these guys? Kirby Smart? No, that's not how it works at Georgia.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear.
So anyway, it gets worse. Turns out there was a player, Amarius Mims, who had entered the transfer portal back a couple of years ago, big-time offensive lineman, and Florida State communicated with him, and actually one of their big-time coaches was involved, and I'm going to get into this story right now about the sanctions and the fact that there is a belief that Georgia is the one that turned them in. And this is on CBS by Will Beckus. They got imposed significant sanctions on Florida State for NIL-related recruiting violations. And I think this is the first time the NCAA's hit somebody over NIL, because it's been the wild, wild west. Nobody really knows what all the rules are, and they change constantly. It says the NCAA will impose several penalties against Florida State. The violations happened back in 2022, and it had to do with the Georgia offensive tackle Amarius Mims, a big-time recruit who was actually at Georgia before he entered the transfer portal. Atkins, who is their offensive coordinator, he got hit with a 2-year show cause and will be suspended for 3 games in 2024. They must also disassociate from a booster for 3 years and from an NIL collective for 1 year, which I believe is called Rising Spear. That does not affect Battle's End, which was, I believe, formed after this whole situation. Atkins is expected to remain on staff at Florida State. So what does a show cause really mean then? If you can stay on staff and still coach, what does that mean? He's suspended for 3 games, but then he gets a 2-year show cause. Can he still coach? Sounds like he can. Maybe this means that he just can't go somewhere else for 2 years unless the school that hires him shows cause for it. It's kind of a misnomer. I always thought when it first came out that show cause meant you couldn't coach anywhere. Actually, you can, but the university must show cause. Like, this is why we want to hire him, and this is a reasonable reason, I guess. It's very weird. It says Atkins, the offensive coordinator, transported the prospect and his parents to and from an off-campus meeting with the booster, the NIL, I guess. It says during the meeting, the booster encouraged the prospect to enroll at Florida State, offered him an NIL opportunity worth $15,000 a month. Isn't that what they're supposed to do? So basically, Atkins got in trouble for transporting the guy. So in other words, had he just called an Uber, I guess it wouldn't have mattered. Of course, he might have gotten in trouble for calling the Uber. This was that weird time when it first started where the universities weren't allowed to be associated in any way with any of the boosters or any of the NIL. That's changed since the beginning because it didn't really make any sense. So basically, he got in trouble for transporting the guy to the dinner. He wasn't at the dinner, but he gave him a ride. So that seems ticky-tack to me, but that's how it was then. It says the unnamed prospect withdrew from the transfer portal and remained at his previous school. And what we're hearing is when he came back to Georgia, they didn't care to hear that. They didn't like that at all. And I think they're the ones that let the NCAA know about it. I cannot confirm that. That is conjecture, but that's what many people think that are sort of in the know.
What's the word on the street?
And it would make sense. I mean, that probably ticked them off. They're like, crap, this guy's a key offensive lineman for us, and he's got a great future here. And here these folks are trying to get him to leave. So George was like, oh, yeah, well, we'll fix you.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Allegedly. Says here's the punishments. 2 years of probation for Florida State, a 2-year show cause and suspension for 3 games for the offensive coordinator, a 3-year disassociation from the booster, a 1-year disassociation from the collective, which I believe is Rising Spear, a $5,000 fine plus 1% of the football budget. That's not a small fine because I would think Florida State probably spends, I don't know, $40, $50 million at least, maybe $100 million on their football. So that's a pretty good little fine, but, they'll be okay with it. Here's the big part of it, a 5% reduction in football scholarships over 2 years, which is basically 5 scholarships, which that would have been a big deal without NIL. I think now you can basically have a guy come on as a walk-on and give him some money. But it's a little bit annoying, some of the other stuff they can't do. They can't have communications for a total of 6 weeks during, all this kind of stuff. Just nicky-knack crap that's really annoying that some guy's going to have to be paid $50,000 a year to keep up with, so the coaches don't commit another violation while they're under probation. And I think why Atkins got in trouble is he didn't tell the truth to the NCAA. They said that he provided false and misleading information. So that's probably why he got the show cause. Liar! That's normally what the NCAA does. It's usually not the infraction that gets you. It's when you lie about it, Bruce Pearl. That's why they nailed Bruce Pearl. He literally got a 3-year show cause over a barbecued sandwich. He had a player, a basketball guy, come to his barbecue, and when the NCAA asked him about it, he said, oh, no, he wasn't there, and then pictures showed up online that he was. So he got nailed over it, which would have been a level 2 little tiny thing like this is, which I don't think this is huge given the NIL situation, but it's embarrassing, and it screws up Atkins for a while, that's for sure. And Georgia's pretty happy over there.
Hey, that hurt.
Because they got to keep Mims and got to get F.S.U. in trouble and cost them 5 scholarships and probably $1 million fine. F.S.U. just can't catch a break. It's like first they get kicked out by the college football playoff, then they get boat raced by Georgia, and then Georgia supposedly snitches on them, gets in trouble, and cost them a fine and scholarship reduction and all that. They've got to be in shock down there. But I do have some good news for you, Florida State. Saved it for the last. Many of you know that Mike Norvell had been targeted by Alabama as a possible replacement for Nick Saban. And Ross Dellinger came out and said Mike Norvell and Florida State have agreed to a new 8-year contract that will pay him more than $10 million a year. So Saban retiring is going to make a bunch of coaches a lot of money. I'm sure Dan Lanning got a big raise. Mike Norvell's going to get a big raise. Probably the DeBoer guy out in Washington, if he doesn't take the job, will get a raise. And Lane Kiffin always gets a raise out of all this stuff. That's one of his favorite things if he doesn't get the job. At some point, they'll probably have to go to him because it sounds like they're getting turned down left and right from the very top because, look, who's going to go there that's in a perfect spot? You've got this Texas guy that's in a great spot. FSU's taking care of Norvell. Dan Lanning's being taken care of by Nike up in Oregon. So really, they may wind up with Lane Kiffin by default, which is kind of the way Lane likes to get hired anyway. He likes being one of the last guys chosen like he was out at USC and then later gets fired on a tarmac and doesn't even get to fly home with the players. That's so classic. I love telling that story. Oh, and one thing for the Vols, Gerard Mayo hired to replace Bill Belichick as Patriots head coach. And Mayo is a VFL. He was a great player at the University of Tennessee. It says here, he played for the New England Patriots his entire playing career. He had played in 103 games. He was either a first or I think it was a second-round draft pick. He was Defensive Rookie of the Year. He retired in 2015. Said Belichick set him up to be one day a head coach. So that's very interesting news. So Belichick gone and Mayo in. So just a little bit of volunteer news there that I thought y'all would be interested in hearing. Anyway, I just thought this was a very interesting story, and we'll see what happens with Nick Saban's replacement. It sounds like they've been turned down by Dan Lanning. Probably Steve Sarkisian's probably turned them down, and we know now Mike Norvell has. Now, if some Alabama fan's going to come in here, we never offered him. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. And that's okay. Look, man, it's hard to budge these coaches out in 24 hours. That's not easy to do. I know you think Alabama's the end-all, be-all. It's not the best job out there. It's not. Georgia's number 1 because of recruiting and they have plenty of money. Number 2 is LSU because of recruiting and they got some money. Texas is number 3 because they got recruiting and lots of money. And Alabama's just slightly out of that first tier, just barely. They have very good recruiting. They've got good money, but it's not the premium. Nick Saban made it a premium. That's why it's so highly touted. Prior to him, they had a bad stretch. And they blame Philip Fulmer for that because they claim that he snitched on them, which he may very well have, and put them in the desert for about 5 or 6 years. But I think Alabama's had their revenge with the Nick Saban hire. Anyway, if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Lets me know to continue to cover my Vols, the SEC, and all these goings-ons. If you've not subscribed, it's on your right, my left. Just hit this little button right here. It'll help you get my videos and it won't cost you a dime. And right over here's the most recent video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy based on your viewing history. Check it out. And we'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.